Welcome to Ready Set Exec, the podcast where we sit down with executives across North America to unpack their business, leadership, and expertise.
And every other week, join us for Market Watch, all things hiring, real insights and no fluff. Hi, everyone. I'm here with Brandon Diehm, Senior Talent Acquisition Leader with a deep professional services experience, most recently serving as Director of Talent Acquisition at Heidrick Struggles. He has built and led high-performing end-to-end TA functions with a strong focus on quality and operational excellence. A self-described recruiting leader, Brandon is equally comfortable owning difficult searches and upskilling recruiters to succeed in demanding and high-stakes environments. It's good to have you on, Brandon.
Thanks, John. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So, we've obviously talked a lot about recruiting and, having worked at, I think, some of the biggest exec search firms out there, you've got a good background in recruitment, but you've also worked in internal TA with them. So when you're a global director of TA, for example, you have sort of this unique idea of like how to map talent, because I think you're recruiting for a big organization. So there's a lot of different positions you got to fill. How do you go about your, let's say, your talent process in terms of like rigor, consistency, candidate assessment, and so on, leading with data and so on when you're making your hires? Because there's obviously a high stakes and a very specific type of person you're looking to recruit as well, right?
Absolutely. And I'll say, John, that I was very intentional about going into recruiting within professional services because I felt that it was an industry where, your product was people's time, expertise, and energy. And as a recruiter, I wanted to be close to where I could have the most impact. And so, professional services seemed to be the place for that. And I got a great start at PwC and I learned a lot there. The consistent theme, whether it's PwC where I started, RSM where I was for a little bit, and more recently Heidrick Struggles, has been a focus on quality. The caliber of person that we're hiring was very, very high, very sophisticated candidate. And so having a really tremendous candidate experience is really important. Similarly, the internal organization is quite complicated as well with high expectations and standards. So in each of those cases where I've worked, it was also equally important to build trusting and strong internal relationships to really understand the company so you could represent it well in the marketplace. So one is, just thinking about how you can deliver the value proposition of the company. And each one was a little different, how you sold it. And then at different career levels, which is another part of where I've worked, is, from entry level up to executive level, what you're selling, how you deliver it, how you assess also changes along the way. The consistent thing is quality, focusing on quality relationships, building trust so you get to know the person, right? And two, being authentic and real and helping people feel like they can be open with you and that they're getting a really good sense of how the organization works. I can get more granular with it, but on a high level, that's sort of the consistent theme from across the board in that professional services space.
Yeah. So, I mean, there must be a bit of character traits, and utilizing some assessments to sort of identify, say, those high potential individuals that, have the right kind of, I mean, I know, for example, with salespeople, right? We tend to put them through like a DISC profile assessment because you can see their drive and so on. I'm sure when hiring professional services, you're also looking for specific attributes or, a willingness to serve, because professional services is customer service, a big part of it. It's customer facing. So having those soft skills is important. What kind of things were you doing to sort of evaluate and figure out, would they be successful in terms of the people skills and so on?
Sure. We didn't use a lot of psychometric assessments, I would say. I mean, in some cases, yes, we did for certain types of roles, but by and large, we used competency-based interviews, asking behavioral questions that align to success characteristics we've identified. And how you identify those success characteristics is about looking at what performance profiles look like over time, and identifying, okay, what are the common threads, or what are the takeaways around the people that have led to their success, and then how do you take that and translate it back into the assessment journey you put candidates through and the questions that you ask. So what I've done with my teams is identify those success characteristics through careful listening, really understanding my company, looking at data with my HR business partners and understanding what good performance looks like, and then translating that into a series of attributes that we build a questionnaire to measure during the interview process. So the recruiters do it kind of on a high level. Usually we've got anywhere from 3 to 10 attributes we're measuring, and we're going to ask questions and score those questions to say, yeah, this person, against a standard is considered to be a good prospect,
Yeah.
right? And then take them to the next stage in the process where we would zero in on maybe success characteristic 2 and 3. And then the next interview would interview again success characteristic 4 and 5, and so on, so that by the end of the interview process, you have this holistic picture of how this person measures against the success profile. That's good recruiting, right? And along the way, the other piece is also making sure that the candidates are getting a chance to ask good questions of you, meeting people who can help articulate what the experience is really like at the company. So I always try to think of it as a two-way street. As important as it is to make sure that we're evaluating people effectively, it's also important they're getting a chance to evaluate us as a company.
Yeah. Yeah, that brings up sort of my next thing in terms of like candidate experience. I feel like with all these new tools coming into play and recently with AI and so on, like candidate experience has kind of been put to the wayside. It's more of just like, efficiency of the function rather than, oh, keep in mind, we're still recruiting people and they need to have a good candidate experience. They have questions too, right?
Right.
What did you do to like improve candidate experience for people? Because I can tell just from you're saying there, it's probably a lengthy interview process to get into one of these big firms. So
It can be, yeah.
you know,
And that's another thing, John. I mean, we could go down a whole path about the balance of, okay, wanting to have a rigorous assessment process, but also not wanting it to be so rigorous and onerous that candidates aren't going to want to stick through it
yeah,
to the very end. I mean, there is that sort of cost benefit analysis that you have to go through and lead through as a TA leader in a high quality organization. But to your point, like how do you make for a great candidate experience? It really comes down to simply empathy.
yeah,
It's remembering what it's like to be a candidate. Simple things, almost like what you learned in kindergarten. Be responsive, right? Don't make people wait and wonder what's going on. Let people down in a kind and reasonable professional manner. Like, don't
yeah,
let people just wonder what's going on. Like, so it's just treating people the way you'd want to be treated yourself, I think, is key to it all. I've said to my recruiters quite often, look, the most important call you make is to the person who doesn't get the job. Why? Because if you handle that well, that's like the worst thing that you have to do as a recruiter, is tell a candidate that they're not getting the job.
yeah,
But if you can do that well, that is a story that gets told over and over again by the candidate who had that positive experience. Even though it wasn't a great outcome, if it was a positive experience and they felt like they were given a fair opportunity and they didn't get the role, but they felt like they had a good chance at it and you were good in communicating along the journey, they'll come back to you later or they'll tell other people, right? And so to me, like, that's how you build networks, that's how you build trust, that's how you build a positive employer brand in the
yeah.
market, is through each and every interaction, good and bad, with a positive sort of feeling at the end.
Yeah, I mean, talking about employer branding, I mean, I think we're often not always, not everybody, let's say, tends to think that the recruiters really are brand ambassadors to a large extent, right? Because you're the first
Mhm.
person that the candidate sees from the company and their first interaction. So it kind of sets the bar in terms of how they're expecting to be treated with the rest of leadership and so on. What are some things you do in terms of like the full life cycle in terms of recruiting and, building that employer brand, also finding people at different stages where you can say, okay, we have a succession plan as well that we're building as we're recruiting, that you need to build leaders and bring people in that can be leaders.
Sure. Well, I think it starts, John, simply with going back to operational excellence, having really well-crafted job descriptions.
Yeah.
Right? It's that simple, because that is generally the first thing that people will see, will be that. And that's where you can have a chance to highlight who your company is. The tone of it can establish sort of a sense for, oh yeah, I could see myself here or not. But the way that your job descriptions are written are super important to being the start of the employer brand. Second is having a great career site, because candidates are savvy. Candidates do research a lot more than they did back in, when I
Yeah.
was younger looking for jobs. Nowadays there's a lot more tools and research access than ever before. So having great information on your career site, having, going back to having all these positive outcomes with candidates that turns up in scores on Glassdoor and other social media sites that measure company sentiment, employee sentiment. So it's all those things rolled into one. It's like showing up well in the way that you present your job opportunities, how you present your company on your website, career site, how you've handled each and every candidate along the way, which then translates into how people feel about you, what they say about you on LinkedIn and so on. And then like from the first conversation with the individual, it's establishing a measure of rapport, not just jumping right into asking tough questions, but finding out an individual's motivations, what encouraged them to apply, taking some time to build a relationship, maybe even being a little vulnerable yourself so they know you're a real human being. And then you can have a real in-depth assessment. If you don't do those things, I think it's really hard. People are on their guard. You're not going to see who they really are. So that's the other thing that I've always encouraged my recruiters to do is, look, let's be human. Let's really establish rapport. Let's get to see our candidates' best side, right? Let's put them at ease so they can be who they really are. And then we'll be able to make better decisions about them. So all those things rolled into one, John, I think are part
Yeah.
of that candidate experience. And then going back to what I said before, it's, you have a conversation with them, you say, what's going to be next, right? What's the next step? Well, I've got 5 additional interviews taking place. I'm not going to be finished until the end of next week, but at that point I'll follow up with you. And then you do it, then you follow up and let them know where they stand. And, if you do those things, and they're simple things, and you do it consistently, it all comes back to showcasing your employer brand in a positive way. And then it's also understanding, what are the key selling points? So you talked about succession, and, some companies are better than others about internal promotion, but I would say that, at Heidrick, it was one of the key selling points for me and my team was over 75% of our partners started out as something more junior than a partner and over time grew. Well, that's a great kind of starting point to lead into a discussion around, well, how do we train, develop, and grow people? And so that was very much a part of the conversations that we'd have with candidates, and was also, because it became a pervasive part of the employer brand, reasons that people came to us. Oh, I've heard that you guys are really good at training, developing, growing, and that's why I'm interested in working here. So then it comes full circle.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I guess part of that building that pipeline of succession planning is also being able to recruit junior people. And that brings up sort of the whole idea of, lollipop-to-legacy pipeline you
Yeah,
talked
yeah.
about, right? And campus recruiting, which is something you were a part of. Like, for those that haven't done campus recruiting, like maybe some best practices and what your experience was with it.
Yeah, honestly, John, I know I'm getting up there, but I love and get great energy working with junior talent. The assessment of junior talent is a little different than it is more experienced talent, because you're really just interviewing and assessing against potential, which is so complex and so interesting to me. But again, if you're doing the right things in terms of measuring who has come and gone and been successful, and then translating that into how you evaluate, you end up hiring the right sorts of folks. But some of the things that are best practices, I mean, one is creating this notion that everyone in the organization is an ambassador of the organization in the market. That's not just for junior talent, that extends to other types of talent, but you have a massive alumni network in your own organization that you can leverage to help you build relationships with schools and the students at those schools. So right off the bat, one of the first things that I do is figure out, well, where did the current population of employees go to matriculate, and do we have deep relationships? One example, at Heidrick Struggles, for example, Georgetown, we had more graduates from Georgetown University than any other university in the country. Don't ask me why, we just did. So that became an immediate target for me. Well, we should continue to build and foster a relationship with Georgetown University, um, build relationships with career services, find key alumni who can also help in building that relationship, and then represent the organization in various events. So the other best practice I would say is, bring the best people. Not everybody likes to do campus recruiting, or so you don't want to just grab anybody who graduated from a particular school and say, hey, you're going back to Georgetown. It's about finding people that are really engaged and excited and, want to represent the brand in a positive way, and then training them to be that brand ambassador who can go out and help represent the company on site, on campus. Another real important success characteristic for campus recruiting is building relationships with the right faculty. So it comes down to figuring out, okay, are there certain majors or programs that are good feeders into your organization? And once you figure that out, or clubs for that matter, I can share an example of a club that I leveraged in a moment. But figuring out kind of where do you need to be spending time and energy at specific schools to tap into the right type of talent. So example, Heidrick, we hire essentially junior people who are entering into the career path of executive search. So we're looking for future recruiters. And it's an interesting type of job because it's sort of a combination of obviously people skills, right? Because you're communicating with lots of people and you have to understand people, but there's a heavy element of research involved in executive search. A lot of the work at the junior level is market mapping and understanding what's happening in particular industry sectors, studying companies, etc. So you need somebody who is both a research person who likes business and is interested in working with people and has a sort of a people bend to them and emotional intelligence. So as we were thinking, I was having trouble identifying talent that kind of fit the profile we were looking for in a part of the country where we hadn't done a lot of recruiting before, and landed on our clubs. I found that we had hired a couple people who had been in consulting clubs on campus.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, maybe there's something to that. And reached out to the presidents of a couple consulting clubs at some schools and talked to them about the roles that we were recruiting for. And they said, we'd love for you to speak to our organization. And I did a couple presentations, and next thing you know, applications were flowing in, and I was able to hire some really terrific people that way. So it's sometimes being a little bit creative to figure out where you can go to find the right type of talent.
No, it makes sense, and that's it's a good strategy. And I mean, that's obviously for larger companies that have big headcounts, you need to have that constant stream of new blood coming in, right?
Oh yeah.
There's a certain aspect of churn that does happen, and retention numbers are something. It's a key metric they're looking at in HR, right? So
It's absolutely baked into the talent strategy, in the model, right? You know that, and you look at this, John, when you're setting your headcount targets year on year for interns and whatever entry level roles you have, it's knowing that, at some point you're going to lose 10%, 20%, and so forth. Not everyone's going to stay for the rest of their careers, right?
yeah.
So understanding what that attrition looks like and being comfortable with that level of attrition allows you to plan appropriately the number of hires that you need to make at an entry level each year.
So what do you think is a healthy number? I mean, from what I've
Hmm.
seen, this is just stats that I've looked at. average company retention rates around 65%, 70%. That's the average they're saying. If you're below that, it's very bad. If you're above that, it's good. But there's also a certain healthy level of attrition you want. I think it's
Sure.
at least 10% you want of people leaving every year, regardless, just because you need new people coming in with new ideas.
It's going to depend on the company, John, but
Yeah,
the way that I like to look at it is you have to set a certain sort of future target, right? So it's not, okay, if you lose 50% of your entry-level workforce in year one, you've got a major problem,
yeah,
right? Your retention should be very high year one, 95%, right? If you're hiring the right people. Year two, obviously there's going to be a little bit of drop off because now they know they've done this for close to 2 years. They know whether it's something they can see themselves doing longer term. And so long as you actually have, something next for them to do and there's a career path for them, you could expect a little bit of drop off in year two, but really like to me, and this is Brandon Diehm, I don't have, crazy research to support this, but I feel like you win if you get somebody for 3 years or more,
yeah,
right? So if you can get 70% of your workforce to stay at least 3 years, you've won. You know, entry-level people don't know what they want to do necessarily for the rest
yeah.
of their lives, and they want opportunities, they want to learn new things. They learn about themselves a lot in those first few years of employment. So that's the metric that I would use to evaluate the health of your early careers program, right? Are you getting 70% over the 3-year mark? Because that's when you get your money back from them. There's so much that you put into those early career people in terms of time, energy, training, the recruiting process. You really start to get that back kind of years 2 and 3 as they're beginning to actually be productive and add value to the organization. So that's how I would set the metrics for early career recruitment. It's going to be different from company to company, of course, but that's
Yeah,
how I did it.
every industry is different for sure. There's higher churn in some industries, but I think that is a good metric, and that's something that we use internally too. Is like when we make a placement in exec search, our goal is for them to stay 3 years, and that's what we tell companies because more than 3, people are going to move.
Yeah,
Either you promote them, give them large raises, or they're going to make a move because there is that loyalty penalty of staying in the role for too long without any kind of changes. The cost of living increase is not going to keep someone long term, right? So you got to
yeah,
have those
of course.
incentives in place, and sometimes you can't. It's just the nature of the business. It's too flat, not enough layers and levels to promote people to. What are some of the common leaks you see in companies like recruiting engine, let's say, that stop them from recruiting top talent? What are some
Yeah.
issues you're seeing just
I
generally?
mentioned one of them earlier, so I'll revisit it because it's a really important one, is sort of that analysis paralysis that can happen. So see this happen most often at more senior levels, but I've also seen it happen with certain stakeholders at junior levels too, where they're just so discerning and they just want to feel like they've really seen the entire solution set, right, before they make a decision, that you end up losing candidates along the way is because the process drags along, or you keep adding additional hurdles of additional interviews along the way because you want to diffuse responsibility for making a bad hiring decision by getting more interviewers involved. Like those are some of the things that I've seen happen everywhere I've worked. And so really, John, the key to fixing that issue is having recruiters who are comfortable pushing back and challenging and can bring data to the table.
Yeah,
So, and this is whether it's campus experienced or executive recruiting, good recruiters are mapping the market, understanding the competition, and bringing data to the table with their stakeholders to say, okay, look, I've explored the market for, we'll just say, talent in Chicago with this certain skill set. And you can do this on LinkedIn and other tools. And here is the number of people that fit the profile that we're looking for. It's a finite number, right? I've reached out to this percentage, and this is the response rate that I've gotten back. This is very representative of the marketplace. Therefore, this is the best talent that the marketplace has to offer. We can change compensation. We can change experience. Like you can make changes to the parameters of what you're searching for, right? If stakeholders can make that decision, or if they want to stay with the decision that they've already set, like the budget that they've planned for the hire or the whatever, then they need to conform to what the market can offer them, right? But they can't do that unless you know the market and can deliver that to them. So that's how you handle, and I've trained my recruiters to handle that paralysis is, look, you're seeing the best of the market. Let's think about what you're not getting from your assessment, and let's make sure that we are really zeroing in on those attributes so we're clear about them. Another thing you can do is referencing. So some companies don't want to provide references, but by and large, if there's a gap to be filled to make sure you're comfortable making a hiring decision, sometimes a reference can fill that gap. And that's another lever that you can pull as a recruiter. So that's one, that major kind of paralysis about the opportunity cost of hiring versus continuing to search for a better candidate is sort of the biggest hurdle that I've seen. I would say number two is having a poorly trained recruiting team. Again, they're the tip of the spear. They're the ones who dictate the candidate experience. And, if they're not trained to really represent the company well, they can really damage your ability to hire great talent. Third thing I'd say is the training you give internal people on how to interview and how to handle a recruiting process. So most people are not, hiring managers are not recruiters. Now at Heidrick Struggles, many of them were, which was kind of an interesting part of that, my role there. But by and large, in all the places that I've worked, stakeholders were not professional recruiters. They were, auditors and tax people and so forth. So helping them understand how to conduct a good interview and giving them the tools to do that so they're comfortable doing it is another key factor, because oftentimes people will sort of default to what they know and will also default to sort of biases that are inherently built into all of us, and so anyway, that would be the third pitfall, I would say, is poorly trained interviewers in general.
Yeah, so a lot to unpack with all that, but
Yeah.
you're right about the poorly trained interviewers. I mean, I can tell you that with the majority of our clients, a lot of times they're bringing in an external agency mainly because they're having trouble hiring, and part of that is they're just very terrible at interviewing and hiring themselves. So when they're part of the process because they're the final gatekeeper, the final boss, let's say, of the interview process, they're the ones making the hiring interview, let's
Yeah.
say. Uh, having some coaching for them, helping them with questions and process and all that, because it seems the majority of, let's say, clients tend to interview based on their gut instinct or, what's worked for them in the past when they were first start scaling their company. And that can be problematic for sure with bias and so on. Right.
Or first impressions, right? Somebody
Yeah.
comes in and, you know, they connect on the fact that they like the same football team and suddenly they're a great candidate, the halo
Yeah.
effect. I mean, there's all these things that can happen. So bringing some operational discipline to the process helps a lot. And I think it gives stakeholders who are not, sometimes they're only hiring once every few years, it's new all over again, giving them the tools to be confident in their ability to assess mitigates the point one that I made around that sort of opportunity cost concern, but it also makes them show up better and give a
Yeah.
better candidate experience because they're actually interviewing them effectively against certain requirements. And then they can feel more confident in making a hiring decision as well.
Yeah.
So you lose that paralysis. So, I mean, it all goes back to operational excellence, right? And having a well-trained recruiting team that understands the employment value proposition, understands the success characteristics, is great at listening and asking good questions of stakeholders and candidates, and can also provide a white glove experience all the way around. Their business partners to their candidates, their business partners to their internal clients as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important aspect you're mentioning, though, is making sure that your talent team are not just order takers internally, right? That they're actually consultants to the business. And I mean, we see that a lot in the recruitment side where a lot of clients will treat their recruiters as just vendors, and they're really losing out on a lot of the value of hiring a search firm is the consultancy that they can offer in terms of, recommendations and who they're finding, and improving your internal process with bringing them on as well, right? They're showing you best practices and so on. So how do you, I mean, that didn't, what I always say is, if you don't have a backbone as a recruiter, you're not going to go far in the business, because you're fighting, your clients' expectations. You're also working with candidates' expectations. You're in the middle of this negotiation, let's say, and being able to be not only honest and authentic, but be able to have a bit of a backbone with either side if they're trying to ask for too much or be unrealistic with what they're wanting to do. It happens on the candidate side where they're asking for too much money, and you got to tell them, well, listen, this is the budget, and this is I don't think they're going to go this far. So, don't shoot yourself in the foot as a candidate asking for more than they can give. Maybe it's not the right opportunity for you. Think about it. And then on the other side, it's, well, you can't lowball them because,
Right.
so,
Well,
I mean,
there's a bit of poker that you play, as a recruiter, both with stakeholders, know when to hold them and know when to fold them and all that stuff. But
yeah.
I mean, again, I think it comes down to building trust, and you build trust when you're prepared and authentic.
Mhm.
And, with internal stakeholders, it starts with an intake meeting generally, where you're working to understand the requirements of the role, and how you show up in that intake meeting, and the questions that you ask, and reflecting back on them. Okay, this is what I heard. Is this right? Making sure that you're aligned goes a long way to saying, okay, yeah, this recruiter knows what they're talking about. They're going to be able to help me, right? And so getting that established off the jump is really, really important. And then having, just like you're doing with your candidates, with those sort of, if I say I'm going to talk to you on Friday, I call you on Friday, you do the same thing with your internal stakeholders, where you have this regular communication drip. Okay, maybe I tell my recruiters, the last thing you should do on a Friday is, anybody that you're working on and any stakeholders with an open role should know how you ended the week. Right? Simple note. Hey, just want you to know, this is what I did this week. This is, you're gonna see 3 candidates on your desk next to, but having some communication going into the weekend is massive, because they know you're thinking about them, and because otherwise they could be thinking about what you haven't done for them all weekend long, and then they're like, calling me on Monday morning. So I try to tell my recruiters, like, treat your internal stakeholders like you do your candidates, being empathetic, putting yourself in their shoes, knowing what you need to do to make sure they're feeling good about the process, and just being open with your communication. Sharing the good and the bad
No, it makes
is
sense.
really important. And I mean, we could spend a whole time talking about negotiating with candidates. I mean, that's a whole
Yeah.
topic unto itself, particularly now where so many states are, have wage transparency laws. It's sort of changed that dynamic considerably. But yeah, that may be a topic for another podcast, John.
Well, I mean, one thing we can touch on is sort of the future of the industry, right? Like, where do you see recruitment going now with AI coming in, and like, for us, I think we've taken the hard stance of, it's a people centric process, and I think we're trying to eliminate any kind of AI interaction with candidates, meaning we use AI on the back end for admin and research and so on, but in terms of
Sure.
interaction with people, it's always a people, face to face interaction and so on.
I've never worked anywhere where we used AI to pre-screen or do video assessments. Have used some tools that pre-screen resumes or offer recommendations. Some are good, some are bad. I mean, I'm sure they're going to get better, trained in time, and be really, really good about presenting qualified people. But I feel like, and I've thought, John, this is a really hot topic I've thought about a lot. Like, what is the difference between a computer and a person? And it's not organic, like,
Yeah.
so a person can think, and computers can replicate how people think in many ways, but computers don't have life experience. And I think that it's that life experience, being a human, growing up, having, a family,
Yeah.
having good things happen, having bad things happen, reacting to things that you can't control. Everything that you've had from the time you were, born to now, it makes up who you are, and it's wrapped in emotions as well as rational thought. And it's that kind of combination of emotional intelligence as well as raw computational intelligence that separates a recruiter from an AI bot or something. And I don't know that, and it scares me to think that AI might be able to replicate that, but having the human experience, I think, brings something special to the table. Like, it makes you think outside the box. It gives you a chance to explore a pathway that maybe is an unusual pathway, but gets you to a new place. And I think that's where AI is going to fall short. So, have I often hired people that don't look perfect on paper? Absolutely. Absolutely. And have they been great hires? Yes, because there was something else there. Maybe they didn't write the greatest resume, but there was some substance to them that made them stand out. And that's something that a recruiter can pick up on that I don't think AI could. So I stand by human recruiters, at least for the time being, as being the best judges of talent to be found. And
Yeah.
they also can provide that human experience for the candidate along the way, right? I think that's important too. It's not just about assessing. It's an important part of the recruiting process is assessing, right? But it's also selling, right? And helping a candidate determine if that place is right for them and their career aspirations. So it's a two-way street that I don't know that AI is quite ready to deliver on.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And recognizing the it factor of certain candidates, I think, is probably some of the best hires that we've made. Is those ones you can pick out of the crowd where you have, all these people that are qualified. There's a lot of qualified executives, let's say, that can do the job,
Sure.
but the ones that have the right, let's say, gumption that can come in and make things happen. The curiosity, the ability to come in, just get things done. That's you gotta, that's not going to show up on a resume for sure. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
Final thing, I guess, to discuss would be just, overall, pulling back the curtain for people that haven't worked with exec search before. What would, how would you say for a new client, they've never used recruiter before, they may have heard bad stories from, these fly by night shops. What do you say is how to work with the exec search firm? What should you be going into, let's say, the engagement with them, and how can you support to make sure best outcomes happen?
Yeah, great question, John. Look, there's some really good executive search firms out there, and I happen to have the chance to work for one of the best for a number of years,
Mhm.
and I had a great experience at Heidrick. I would say, like, a best practice is to treat them to some degree as an extension of your own talent acquisition function, right? They obviously are not part of your company, right? You're contracting them to accomplish a search for you, but they have to be able to represent the brand. They have to understand your organization, the nuances of it. They they will often bring deep expertise in whatever industry sector or functional area that you're looking to fill, right? So they get that, but understanding your company and what would make somebody an exciting talent for that company is key. And you can't get that unless you have a really good rapport and a strong kind of open intake meeting with that executive recruiter. So bringing them into the fold, helping them understand the organization, I would say, is number one. So as you're assessing different executive search firms, it's really like, who do you have a rapport with? Who do you think gets you,
Yeah.
and who brings market expertise that will be particularly useful for this particular search that you're working on. But those are the things that I would say are most important. They're all good firms, but it's like, who do you feel like a connection with? And because it's very personal hiring executives, and you need to be comfortable working with whoever that person is that's helping you make that very, very difficult decision.
Well, yeah, I mean, the right executive can make a huge impact to the business. So it's not something you can, you know, trust with just anybody for sure. Someone, what one person said to me once was the CEO is hiring the search firm because they see someone that could replace them, meaning like they trust someone to have the same judgment as they would when bringing someone on, because they don't have the time to go do this. And so that's
Right.
when I heard that, I was like, okay, that makes sense in terms of like understanding their mindset of their business and what they're trying to achieve, and sort of their values. I think it comes down to values at the exec level in terms of bringing that cohesive team with shared values to become a team, right? And so that definitely is something that comes to mind. But what do you, in terms of best practices? So, people are vetting search firms out there. What are some best practices that you think a good search firm should be doing as part of their process? And not to
Uh,
name companies, but more of general terms of like, in a good exec search process, these 5 things should happen. If you're not
yeah.
seeing these 5, they're missing out. You're missing out on a good experience, or you're missing out on better candidates, right?
Yeah, you'll have, of course, a standard cadence of meetings, updates with your executive search firm. So established intake to really hone in on the requirements and understand, and calibration meetings to follow
Yeah.
to make sure that you're really tight. Generally, you'll see some prototype candidates profiles shared
Yeah.
as a means of calibration would be part of the expectation. Okay, show us some profiles that you think align, and let's get tight on that. And then having kind of regular updates, very significant and deep assessment information on the potential candidates that could include psychometrics. We recommend psychometrics as part of, our ability to deliver insights. So I'm going back to Heidrick, but leveraging various psychometric tools on top of behavioral interview questions to provide a holistic picture of candidates would be something I would expect from a top search firm. And then, a sounding board, being somebody who is not necessarily dictating decision making, but facilitates the conversation that leads to good decision making is key, and can help negotiate offers, is really, really knowledgeable about compensation and executive comp structures, and can bring some guidance around there as well. Those would be the main things that I would say, John, from a top executive search firm that you would expect.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. The negotiation piece is something I think is often overlooked when using recruiters, is, negotiating a package that's not just going to get someone to come work there, but also come work there and stay. Right. And that's often the
Yeah,
conversation we have with clients, where we're like, listen, you can lowball them and they'll sign the contract because they're desperate for a job. They've been out of work for 6 months, right? They need a job, but they're signing just because they need a job. If you pay them what they're worth, then they're not going to be looking for a job in 3 to 6 months, because
right,
a
right,
lot of people take the job and then because they need to pay bills. And then a few months later, they're already looking because they're like, well, this is not the level I want to be at. And I hear this from candidates all the time when I ask them, what is the minimum expectation you have for salary for a role? And they'll say, well, my last job I'm making 280, but right now I'm looking for at least, 175 would be okay. When they say 175, they're saying this is what I would take just to get out of, get out of my bed in the
right.
morning. But I'm not happy at 175 because I'll always remember that I made 280 at my last company, and they're
Yeah,
going to push for the same as what they were making. Right. It's just logical human. Like why would I want to take less if I'm worth more? Right. So I think that conversation's something you really got to have, because a lot of times they're thinking to get a deal, and I'm like, you're not getting a deal, you're getting a rental executive for 6 months or a year, and as soon as the economy turns, which it will, They're going to be
Yeah.
giving you their paper and moving on, and we don't want that either. So you pay for retention too, right?
Well, look, it's an excellent point, and it kind of comes full circle with what we were talking about at the very beginning of this recording. So, part of the value that recruiters can bring,
Yeah.
is based on that. If they're really good about and doing the right things and establishing the kind of relationship of trust with a candidate, the candidate will open up to them about their expectations
Mhm.
and motivation. And so if you truly understand a candidate's motivations, that's what can really be powerful in helping your client make good decisions, make the right offer, et cetera. It all comes down to like, why is this person looking? What's important to them? If you can figure that out, then you can really land in a good place. You can deliver the right opportunity for the candidate. You can help the client, your internal stakeholders, close them with an appropriate offer. And it just comes down to the recruiter doing a good job of establishing that rapport and relationship from the get-go.
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. Any final thoughts before we kick off for the day in terms of things?
This is a really good conversation. Like I've been a recruiter my entire career. I love it. I think it's an amazing profession. I think it's a positive profession. You get to help people make important decisions. You're a part of these really key moments in their lives. You also help companies become better and build better teams and hire great bosses. Like to me, it's an amazing profession. I think it often gets overlooked and is misunderstood. And I hope maybe this podcast will help debunk that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think because it's not as regulated, let's say, as financial or accounting and things like that, you tend to get a lot of, let's say, fly by night players and things like that as well.
Yeah.
And that gives us a bad name. And then, but at the professional level, let's say at the exec level, you know, you're dealing with professionals that care, that want us to make a difference in the company's future and the candidates' lives and so on. And that's what drives us. It's what I've always said to everyone. It's for-profit social work, is what it is.
That's an interesting way. I like that. I
Because
like
we
that. It
care about
is.
the people. It's about taking care of people, and that's what drives us to do it. I saw that a lot in temp staffing. Because I did that for close to 10 years in temp staffing, where you see people at the lowest point in their lives. Like if you're having to wake up at 5 a.m. to come in for construction work, you're struggling, right? And so we've seen those people from the mission to struggling to stay off the street. So working with them for many years, when you are able to secure them full-time employment, find them a good job, and then have them come back into the office 6 months later, say, hey, I'm off the street now, or I was able to provide for my family, and they're so happy, and that kind of difference you can make. That's 20 years later, I'm still here, and I think it's a really great industry, and as you said, it's often overlooked, but I think everyone hates a recruiter until they need a job, and then we're your best friend. So
That's so right.
so many times, but I think, if you get a good job, and you probably, a recruiter was involved in that in some way, whether internal TA or agency and internal teams don't have to be at odds and ends with each other either. I think we're here to supplement and support rather than, take away their jobs or anything like that. Right.
Absolutely, John. Like I know we're getting back into, our discussion here on a brand new topic, but I will say this, like part of operational excellence in my mind for an internal talent acquisition function is to partner with the right third-party vendors,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to overdo it, right? You want to empower your team to be able to deliver for the most part, but sometimes you need to supplement, and sometimes external search is the right answer. And so it's having relationships with the right vendors that you trust, that can do good work for you, that understand your company, all the same things that we talked about for
Yeah.
choosing an executive search firm ring true for, other types of search. And then treating them as an extension of your team, I think, is how you get the best results from that third party vendor, right? Giving them the information they need to represent your brand, to be able to explain the value proposition of the opportunity, right? And and establishing a regular cadence of communication, both bi-directional, so that
Yeah.
they feel like they're part of your team, and then they'll do more work for you. That's just been my philosophy as an internal TA leader my entire career, and I think it's paid off. I have great relationships with third-party vendors, different firms out there for different things. I know which ones are good at which types of
Yeah.
searches, and people will call me and be like, "Hey, Brandon, I need to find X. Is there someone you recommend?" I'm like, "Of course." And, I have that person that I know can help them fill that need. So I'm glad you brought up the third party vendor piece, because that is I think a big part of how to run a good TA function.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I think one thing for them to think about is, the better relationship and the more communication you give to your partners externally, the more willing they are to work with you and so on, right? I think
Sure.
it's just like any relationship, the more you nurture it and treat them with respect and so on, then the more commitment you'll find from them, right? If you just treat them as a contingency vendor where you'll throw them a role every so often, expecting it to be filled and not giving them context or communication,
Yeah.
how much effort are they going to put into it? But if you have someone that's retained or you're paying a fee and you're communicating regularly and, integrating into your meetings and forecasting and so on, that's a better partnership overall for everybody and better outcomes. One of the things that had come to mind for me was with a lot of companies, TA tends to be the area that to get the most cuts, where there's, when things are slowing down, they'll cut TA, right?
Yeah.
And so I think supplementing with third party is helpful rather than hiring up people that you're going to have to let go later, internally for seasonal hiring or large hiring groups and so on, multi hires. Like,
Yeah. For surges and so forth.
yeah,
Absolutely.
because if you're hiring people that you're going to have to downsize your team in a year anyways, it makes more sense to bring a vendor in than to hire and lose the morale of half the team being chopped. So what we're seeing across the board now with companies is TA teams being like efficient and smaller, and that's why they're trying to bring AI in as well, I guess. So
Yep.
keeping things under control headcount wise, keeping it consistent, I think is better for an experience for everybody too. And I just say that because that's a recent example I've seen with some companies where they're like, yeah, we just downsized their team again. Every year we're doing it. It's like, well, your
Yeah.
strategy maybe needs some adjusting.
Yeah, I mean, this is another topic, but I think there's tenure can make a big difference in a recruiting function too. We talked
Mhm.
about the 3 years. If you have someone 3 years or longer, you're
Yeah.
sort of winning. I think that is true also within talent acquisition. Maintaining a strong recruiting team that really understands the business and has had a chance to make lots of relationships with candidates in the market and is building pipelines. I mean, there's so much value to that, right? And if you're constantly like bringing in and then letting go of recruiters, you never get the benefit of that institutional knowledge, the tenure, the pipelining. Um, that can
Yeah.
be incredibly valuable. It can really speed up time to fill, improve quality. It's almost hard to measure some of the impact of that in a financial way, but I think it's real.
No, for sure. I think having experienced people that know what they're doing is job one for your company, right? So that's
All
all
right.
good.
Well,
Well,
John, it's been so great. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully I was adequate in answering the questions that you had. They're
yeah,
all very relevant questions.
I appreciate it. It's been great, and we can definitely talk recruiting all afternoon if we keep up at it. So thanks a lot for your time, and we'll be in touch.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.